fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren. Mr. Dave Martino is in the house after destroying New York.
That's right. I'm like some like Godzilla.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean,
just
the police have been here 3 times already looking for you.
I know.
So,
I'm not allowed back.
No, I know.
After carousing for 2 nights.
Crazy. Jumping on tables and everything. Man, you're really excited, you know. Imagine if you really drank, what would happen.
I know.
It'd be terrible.
It'd be crazy.
You know.
Insane.
Horrors, I'll tell you. Godzilla. Have you seen that Godzilla that came out a while ago?
The most recent?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it good or not? I still can't.
I liked it. I
Yeah?
liked it. I didn't like it as much as everybody else, but I did like it.
Yeah. And what's that, Terrifier 3?
Oh, yeah. I haven't even seen Terrifier 2.
No, well, 3, I'll tell you, when the guy finds his girlfriend with another guy in the shower and he takes a chainsaw to him and he chainsaws up the guy's bum, I tell you, I don't know where it's going to stop. It's just getting more and more aggressive.
Yeah, seems a little aggressive to me.
Yeah, it's a little bit more than, you know. I love it, too, in the sense that the guy never dies. You know what I mean? You cut his leg off, you cut all these things off, and he's still conscious and suffering, and they can still... I don't know how much someone can take, I'll tell you. I break a nail, and I'm out.
Yeah, that's it.
Well, speaking of horror, we've got a horror person here. We've got a writer, and he's got another book out called Missing in Miskatonic. There you go. And it's a Travis Daniels investigation. So, J.P. Behrens, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
J.P., what's going on? You're writing horror. Why? Were you damaged when you were young? Or?
You know what? Possibly. I have some great stories of the random garbage my dad did in the 80s that certainly scarred me, probably. But yeah, I mean, I'm one of those. I grew up as like a latchkey kid, and I was watching horror films really early, like way probably too early. So. But writing-wise, it just kind of fell into place. I met some people, and there were some opportunities to publish, and that's where I ended up. But I try to branch out. I've got a fantasy novel that I'm working on, and a magical realism novel that I'm working on as well. So I'm all over the place.
Right. You know, when you grow up and you're kind of watching and reading all of that horror that's kind of considered classic, you know, everything from King to on, you know, whatever. How do you top that? Not that you're trying to top it, but where's the room to grow? Do you know what I mean? Because so much was done in the 80s.
I get what you're saying. In terms of growth, I think right now, a lot of the really good stuff coming out generally is going to deal more with, for me at least, with stuff that interests me is like psychological horror. So it's really dealing with people and their place in the world, and then having these people who are kind of trying to figure their lives out have to deal with also some crazy nonsense coming at them. So, for instance, I'm trying to think of some good examples that are more recent, but like Hereditary, the movie that just came out a little while ago, the Babadook, it's the monster's almost secondary to the actual story of the people and I guess the psychological challenges they're trying to get through while being threatened by whatever monster or whatever entity or power is coming at them. And I think that's where the growth is because, you know, the generation of the 80s, Gen X, we certainly had our time and and the horror of that time reflected what we were going through. But now we've got a whole litany of new horrors that we have to deal with on a daily basis. And I think that's the new thing that people are writing to is, you know, just that sense of the world changing very quickly and everyone just trying to get a hold of it, try to understand what the world is doing right now.
I think the real horror from today's date will come in 20 years when the children of this time grow up, because they'll grow up with it, and so they'll write the best horror.
Yeah, I mean, right now I have kids who are growing up right now who are going through a lot of this stuff, and my kids are interesting in that they're very much the COVID generation. And one of them managed COVID fine. He's very, can be on his own. He's good with it. The other couldn't, is very social, and COVID just was a travesty for them and their mental health. But I think, but we have Gen Y writers right now, or millennials, and some of the Gen Z writers are coming up who are putting out stuff that really reflect back on COVID and the way that has changed the pre and post COVID worlds and how that's changed the way they've seen things. You've got writers dealing with that. It's the Gen Alpha kids, the kids in elementary school and middle school now, that it's going to be interesting what they come up with and the stories they start telling in, like you said, 20 years.
Yeah. I always see that, but I'm old. So this book here, what's the premise of it?
So this book it's kind of like, it was a fun project for me to do. It follows Travis Daniels, a private detective in the late 1920s, pre-Depression, and he gets hired to find a missing girl up at Miskatonic University in Arkham, Massachusetts, and he gets paid a lot of money that he can't bring himself to say no. Heads up there and ends up encountering a whole lot of Lovecraftian horror while he's trying to find this young girl. And it's definitely the first time that this character is going to be dealing with supernatural, but it won't be the last. So this is the first in a hopeful series of novellas and novels of him dealing with crime and solving cases reluctantly, while also having to steer clear or try to navigate the world's navigate the roads and the rivers and the turns of all the supernatural world that he's going to deal with, the twists and turns.
Right. Why the 20s?
It seemed like a really good time for a noir detective story. Also, I'm a huge fan of the show Carnival that was on HBO, and that takes place during Dust Bowl era, right after the Great Depression. And I don't know, it kind of fit together. That's also when Lovecraft did a lot of his work is set up in the 20s and the 30s in that kind of era. So melding noir detective with the 1920s and the 1930s, add in the Great Depression, and I get to kind of play with a lot of the cool things that I grew up on. I loved Carnival. I liked the show Supernatural, and that kind of Supernatural's already done modern day kind of noir horror supernatural show. So putting in the 20s seemed like nobody had done it yet. I hadn't read it, and it seemed like it could be fun. And it certainly took away a lot of the technology that we rely on for research. So now these characters are going to have to kind of research it and fumble their way through. There's no quick Google to find out what's going on.
Well, that's what I was wondering too. Did you find any challenges? I guess not only writing about the period of the 1920s, but also just with the characters and what they can do and what they can't do without modern technology.
No, I'm lucky that I grew up in the 80s. I didn't have a ton. I was pre-internet. I didn't have Google. I didn't have that to rely on. I grew up on go to the library and use the card catalog. But so that wasn't too difficult. Learning about what cars were prevalent at that time, learning the types of guns that a private detective could use, things like that took a little bit of extra research. But the hardest one is the sequel. The sequel book the first book takes place in Arkham, which is a fictional town. The second book takes place in a real town in Washington State. And that was a nightmare because that took a ton of research. I had to get maps of the time period and figure out a lot of the stuff. I took some liberties, but for the most part, the location, the language, some of the businesses that are mentioned were all legit businesses, and the directions and the way people took around town, all legit. travel time, all of it. I did a lot of research into figuring it out.
Why the jump from a fictional town to a real town?
Bad mistake on my part.
There you go.
Yeah, it was, I wanted to, so I had come up with the idea to do a, werewolves, meet Sasquatch story. And I did a little bit of research, and Sasquatch happened to be a Canadian, were more prevalent in Washington State and some in Canada. And then werewolves, I kind of figured out a way to bring them in, because it became Native American werewolves. And the story ended up taking place in the catalyst for the story, which was a murder mystery, I had take place right on the border, and there's a forest, or there's an area called the Monashee Mountains that I placed that on, and then just from there I started looking at the maps, and I just said, here's some really conveniently located towns that I can use. Picked them, and then when I started doing the research, I realized I made a horrible, horrible mistake. This was much harder than I thought it was going to be. And but I did my due diligence. I actually researched some First Nation Native American languages, and a lot of the history of one of the Native American tribes is very much researched and in the book, so I took the time to do it right. But yeah, I don't know that I'm going to be using real towns in the future again, because it was such a mess getting it all right and making sure that I nailed all the facts and didn't completely disregard reality.
Yeah, it's hard work, especially when the town is part of the story. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, very much.
When it's like a character, when it's really involved, because you do have to know what buildings existed, what streets, and how people were, what jobs were there. You start to miss out if you don't get that, right? You know? Yeah,
it was. I mean, the town was important, and the town is very much a character in the book, in the novella, because this is a town right before the Great Depression kicks off, and even then, people were having a hard time with jobs. It wasn't like the Great Depression happened and everyone lost their job. People were losing their jobs for months before that kicked off. And so you have a lot of people kind of struggling in this town, and then you have the pressures of the railways and the rail barons and the lumber barons in the areas, plus you have the Native Americans who just lost half of their reservation, the northern half of their reservation, and it was sold off by the U.S. government to said lumber barons. So you've got a lot of anger and a lot of worry and a lot of scapegoating going on while there's a murder mystery, while the detective's trying to solve it before a bunch of werewolves and Sasquatch have a civil war and just wreck the whole area.
I'm glad we don't have those problems anymore. Everything.
Oh yeah, no.
Just they were taken care of in the 20s.
Yeah. So it was fun, and it was interesting, and it took a lot of research, and I'm really proud of the book. It was like, I really want to try to avoid using real towns again if I can help it.
Yeah.
I'd much rather use fictional towns that aren't copyrighted. So
yeah. There's advantages to both, but it's a trickier and harder job, you know. There's this werewolf sex podcasts all over the place too, eh? You get, I don't know. It's crazy. I heard about this just last week, they got all these sites where people go on and you can listen to werewolves having intimacy with other werewolves and stuff.
Like an audiobook or?
No, it's just the podcasts, I guess.
Wild.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was listening to Howard Stern. They were playing some of them, and it was like there would be like a woman werewolf wanting to have werewolf babies with whatever, and she describes her sexual encounters with a werewolf on a podcast.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's right up there with, years ago there was the raptor, velociraptor erotica.
Yeah.
There's Sasquatch erotica was a thing back then, too. There's a lot of wild stuff out there.
Yeah. Seattle has some of those bars for Sasquatches and bears and stuff like that. But that's a different story. That's a different story. It takes too long. Now, is there going to be, do you put violence, or are you primarily focused on mental fear or horror in the stories? Or is there actual real descriptive violence in here?
In the Travis Daniels books, I think the violence you would see would be the same kind of violence you would encounter with like a Raymond Chandler novel, or Dashiell Hammond novel. So it's there, it's few and far between. I wouldn't go so far that it's super graphic. The Werewolf Sasquatch book certainly is going to have a moment where, regardless of how much he's trying to stop it, werewolves and Sasquatch are certainly going to fight it out. Because you can't have that book and make that kind of pseudo-promise and not deliver on it. Like, yes, he's trying to avoid it, but, it's Sasquatch and werewolves. You gotta have them fight. It's not visceral. It's definitely not what one would consider extreme or splatterpunk. But there is violence, of course, and there are stakes. But yeah, I try to veer as much away from extreme and splatterpunk as I can, not because I don't like it or that I think less of it. It's just I've done that, and I feel like I did it enough that I was happy with what I did, and I did everything I wanted to do in that realm. I don't need to keep trying to do it again, if that makes sense.
In real life, is that?
Yes. I live in the middle of nowhere, and my first book, Portrait of a Nuclear Family, is considered extreme psychological horror, and that one people have said is, borderline extreme versus splatterpunk. So, what it was really meant is a psychological horror book that, I guess, just the subject matter definitely affected people, and people had a bit of a visceral reaction to it.
Right. Throwing up in their beds and stuff, yeah.
Well, certainly not getting to sleep, but people had to, put the book down occasionally because it got a little intense.
When you use supernatural creatures and werewolves and things like that, and you're kind of touching in that world, are you doing the standard of what people get from a lot of others, or do you create your own sort of rules?
A little bit of both. So I definitely start from the standard trope, but because the first book starts with in the Lovecraftian world, I get to kind of use a lot of the things that people did with Lovecraft with things like werewolves and vampires. Brian Lumley did vampires with Necroscope, and he kind of did his own thing while still making them blood-sucking creatures. And there are just so many different versions of the legends worldwide that honestly, like the trope, the single one that most people know is just scratching the surface of all the different legends. So you can kind of pick and choose and mix and match and pull a little bit from here and there and then play with some ideas based on whatever culture you're pulling in and saying, well, how does this fit? And how can I make this kind of original but also familiar? So you try to do a little bit, or at least I try to do a little bit of both. That way, people coming into it don't need to feel like they have to relearn what's going on, but also they get kind of an interesting concept from it,
Right. So, and Travis Daniels, what's your relationship with this character? He's your main character. Mm-hmm. Are you writing from his point of view throughout the book? And how do you interact with this character yourself?
So Travis is the first person narrator of the book. This is him very much being Watson to himself, of telling the story of his investigation and how it went down. And my relationship to the character really is he's kind of a curmudgeon. He's a bit of a misanthrope, but feels that he is responsible for people and that he does want to help. He's just kind of like, a gruff guy. And I tend to sometimes be a little bit like that. So when I'm doing the book, I'm just kind of imagining, okay, I'm in this situation, but I'm a much gruffer, much more capable guy, and I'm going to help, but I'm not going to be happy about it. So, a lot of this is him reluctantly dealing with the supernatural world because he understands that if he doesn't, people are going to die. So he's a very reluctant hero throughout the series.
Do you find writing that character and having the character's personality being gruff Did you find that it makes you gruffer in real life?
No.
It kind of bleeds over? Or?
No. Actually, I think it's more of a catharsis. It makes me less gruff because I can get it out on the page. All the things I want to say, I could just be like, I can type them now. It doesn't spill over anymore.
Yeah, instead of to your family and all that.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's crazy. Well, how do you attack the dialogue then? Are you sitting into the character's mind? Do you hear your character and then see him like a movie, or is it something different?
It's more along the lines of, I woke up in the morning and I did this and did that, and when I do dialogue, I generally won't have dialogue tags on Travis's dialogue because it's him talking. Meanwhile, I'll definitely put them on other characters, and then it's sometimes, his thoughts will sometimes get into the narration. Generally, if I think it's appropriate, I'll drop those in italics to kind of offset them for the reader, so that you know that this is a thought he's having versus him describing what was going on. And it's a bit of a balancing act. The reason I actually wrote this in first person was because first person was something that I was really bad at, and I found it incredibly difficult, and it was kind of a way for me to figure it out and get a little bit stronger with that specific writing style. And I sat down and read a lot of first person books that I thought were really good to get a better handle on how to do it properly. So, because I can't do anything easy, I always have to find a way to challenge myself, which is why I jump from genre to genre, because I'm easily bored. So I always have to find a new challenge to be like, okay, let me, how can I make my life harder today? Let me write this sort of thing,
Yeah. Well, what else is there? Yeah.
Yeah. So that's, it seemed like a challenge, but it was a lot of fun, and it was cool to kind of write a story from a character's point of view with that character's very specific outlook on the world to pull from, and it certainly made doing certain things in the story a little bit easier, like, the way he sees the world. I don't have to be a generic or an objective narrator. I'm very a subjective narrator because this is Travis Daniels telling his story.
Right. But are you thinking of the reader when you do this, and not necessarily like catering to the reader, but when you write a gruff sort of 1920s person, they're going to be a little bit out of tune of what it is today. So when someone's reading it today, are you trying to cater toward that, like soften it, so to speak, or do you just go full blow raw?
I certainly take into account certain stigmas of the modern day versus what would have been acceptable in the 20s. I don't necessarily let my main character find that sort of thing acceptable. Like in the 20s, it was acceptable to be pretty much a misogynist and a racist. My character is certainly not that. So my main character is more progressive to a point. I want the character, even though he's gruff, I want him to be gruff in a likable, kind of funny, favorite uncle sort of way for the reader. But at the same time, I still want him to be that concept or that idea of the 1920s bachelor man's man, loner type guy who doesn't need anybody, like I said, very much the kind of characters you would read in a Raymond Chandler novel, but definitely a little bit stepped up to be a little bit more progressive for the time of when it is. But I do actually add characters who are more like what you'd find people to be in the 1920s, but I make them the villains, or I make them sound incredibly out of touch, because even then, it didn't exactly, it would stick in certain people's craw if you were very much like, you tell like a woman, like, listen here, little lady, you'll think better when you're married. You have a young female character is not gonna really react well to that. Even in the 1920s, it's gonna get their hackles, it's definitely gonna get them up. It's gonna make them angry. So I kind of play with a lot of that, and the 20s are not a monolith. So you had a lot of different personalities in the 20s. I'm sure there were some progressive people back then who would have, looked at racism and misogyny and been like, no, that's wrong. But they were just few and far between.
Right.
Travis happens to be one of them.
So is there a subtext? Do you have a meaning? Is there something you want the reader to take away from this, or is this pure entertainment fear?
This one, I think, the first one is going to be mostly pure entertainment and thriller. It's certainly, I don't know that there's so much a deeper meaning in this one as there will be in the second one. The second one talks about some heavier issues. The first one's mostly kind of a getting to know you monster story, but, setting the world up, creating some mysteries. You're getting to know Travis. You're seeing him navigate the world of the supernatural. And you're also getting the idea that this world is not always going to end well. This is a world that has a lot of darkness to it. It's kind of gritty. Bad things are going to happen. And so this is more of an introductory to the series than it would be have any larger message. I think over the course of the series there'll be a larger message, but this one's really a getting to know you kind of teaser for the whole series.
How are you handling, in your series, how are you handling your continuity? Do you have a system? Do you have notes, a series Bible, a Necronomicon of characterization?
Ooh. My nipples are hard.
So I generally don't start, and this is me, but I generally don't start any project unless I have an idea of what the overall framework is going to be. So I don't have a story Bible. I wish I did. I probably should, but I don't yet. But I do have an idea of, I know how this has started. I knew the main track that the whole book is going to take. I know which kind of monsters Travis Daniels is going to definitely encounter, and some of those may get added over time. I know the larger story that will take place over the whole series. I know more or less how it's going to end. I know more or less the characters he's going to, come across and the people that he's going to become allies with that may or may not reappear based on the needs for the story as it develops. I don't have a super detailed outline for the larger story, but as I'm writing the next one in the series, I generally will throw together a synopsis that I use as a kind of beginner's outline, as a rough outline that I can sit down and write my rough draft, and then as it changes, I'll update the synopsis. But I know where the signposts are. I don't know what's going to happen generally in between each of the signposts, but I know that I have to get from A to B. Somewhere in between A and B, some other stuff might happen, but all of that stuff is going to be service to getting me to B, and then from B to C, C to D, until I get to my final destination.
Basic structure. Yep.
So what do you get from writing the books? What is it for you?
It's the only thing I have ever liked to do. I have had several jobs over the years, and I honestly hated all of them. And I'm not happy unless I'm working on stories, telling stories, doing this. I'm a miserable wretch if I'm not doing this. I mean, my wife will tell you that, my wife, when we had our first kid, we looked at the price of daycare, and daycare was more money than I was making at a job. So we just made the decision of, JP, you're going to stay home and take care of the kid, and I'm going to go to work because I like my job, and she likes her job. She makes more money than I do. And I was like, I hate working. I'll stay home and write and take care of the kid. And honestly, that's kind of stuck. And once the kids started going to school full time, it was, 10 years, that's 10 years later, I think, roughly for us. It was kind of like, all right, I'm writing now. And right about that time, I had a book come out, and it just kind of became like, this is what I'm going to do now.
There you go.
Yeah. And I'm happy. If I need to get a second job or a part-time thing for whatever reason, I'm more than happy to do it. I'm not going to like it, but I'll do it.
Yeah.
But writing is what I enjoy. If I don't write, I'm a miserable pain in the butt.
So are you doing social media, website, lemonade stands? Like, where do people find JP?
Oh, you can find me on several bits of social media. I have a website. It's jpbehrensauthor.com. because I'm still trying to buy jpbehrens.com. That person just will not sell it to me. And then I'm on Facebook, I'm on Threads, I'm on Blue Sky, I'm on Goodreads, and I'm on there. I'm not super active, though. I'm not a huge fan of social media. I've never really been. I'm on there as much as I kind of need be for promotional stuff, but I am good at getting back to answers. If you message me and ask me a question, I'm very good at getting back to that kind of stuff. And if you go to my website and shoot me an email through the contact page, again, I'm very good at getting back to those kind of things. But, actually interacting on social media is rough because I just really don't like it.
Yeah. Well, we'll put all of that up on our website so people can find you easily. And glad you came by. So the book we're talking about is Missing and Miskatonic. And, of course, it's a Travis Daniels investigation.
Yes.
And our guest is the author of that, J.P. Behrens. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Thanks, JP.
Thank you.
This has been a production of the House of Mystery Radio Show. To find out more about our show, guests, or hosts, go to our website at houseofmysteryradio.com.